if you let me know, I will answer those questions.
Will do. Well, let's go on and get started. Welcome everybody to Heritage Giving Circles workshop series that we have been providing. We want you to know the talent of our amazing membership. And today's workshop is called Show Me the Money, and it's fundraising strategies to increase revenue for your organization. And today you are going to hear from the amazing Tameka Cass, who is the Chief Development Officer for Metrocare Services. I'm going to read her bio so that you know that you are dealing with a rock star this evening. And what we will do is, if you have questions, put them in the chat, and we will take questions throughout the presentation, because I want you to be able to take advantage of her brilliance. But she's got a lot to cover this evening. So we want to make sure that you are able to get all this and glean all this information. So Tameka Cass is currently the Chief Development Officer at Dallas nonprofit Metrocare Services, the largest provider of mental health services in Dallas County. In her role, Tameka is responsible for the fund development strategies to create and enact the framework for growing Metrocare's philanthropic footprint through major gift fundraising, corporate and foundation support, and events. As an experienced fundraising professional with a demonstrated history of more than 18 years of working in the nonprofit industry, Tameka is skilled in strategic planning, fund development, relationship management, capital campaigns, event management, grants management and compliance, volunteer engagement, board and advisory committee oversight, team building, and communications, both internal and external. Tameka has a strong knowledge of Dallas's nonprofit community and its key challenges. In her spare time, which is very limited, she enjoys spending time with her 11-year-old son, Jackson. Additionally, she serves as the president of the Parent-Student Association Board at St. Philip's School and Community Center, and she is also the vice president of external affairs of the Dallas chapter of the Association of Fundraising Professionals, and a founding member of HERitage Giviing Circle, and is actively engaged in Power in Action Dallas, a collective unit of community leaders focused on removing systemic disparities impacting Dallas's African-American community. She holds a master's in science and human relations and business from Amberton University. So without further delay, I want to introduce to some and welcome for others the amazing Tameka Cass, who is going to do our presentation this evening. So again, mute your phones or computers, and then definitely use the chat if you have questions, and I'll be moderating the chat throughout this presentation. So Tameka, you're on.
Thank you, Dr. Booker. I appreciate such the nice welcome and invitation from HERitage, both you and Akila and Dr. Halima, for allowing me to take the opportunity to host this grant workshop on HERitage's behalf and really inspire others who are in this space and equip them with what they need, which can oftentimes be taxing and scary, I would have to admit, when you're responsible for bringing in money and all that comes along with that, because it is a lot. And I'll just say that this is going to be a very informal meeting and overview. There is a lot to cover, and I'll be kind of looking off again. I have several screens open so I can be looking at the presentation. But we'll ask everyone just a few housekeeping rules. If you'll mute yourselves, please, that would be very helpful. And unfortunately, my notification is still making a noise, so I'm sorry about that, but I'll try to talk over that because I want to go ahead and get started. But like many of you probably, I did not set out to become a fundraiser. Fundraising and a job in this profession somewhat fell in my lap while I was working at the Dallas Housing Authority, which was my first nonprofit job ever. I came from a banking background and had hoped to have a career in banking. Long story short, as François mentioned, I've been in the field more than 18 years, probably closer to 20 now, and I'm enjoying it at times and pulling out my hair at others, as you would understand. So my presentation, as she stated, was show me the money, because I feel like that's what we do all day, looking for opportunities to seek philanthropic support for the organizations we represent. And so I'm going to walk you through, because I wasn't sure about the level of expertise of all the attendees. I'm going to walk you through just kind of some basic stuff and then some more involved stuff. And so with that being said, here we go. Okay. So when I first got into the field, there were a lot of words being interchanged, philanthropy and fundraising. I'm like, okay, are they the same? I'm not sure. And so I always like to give an overview, which is philanthropy really is the practice of giving money and time to help make life better for other people. And so if you give of your money, then you are a philanthropist. We all are. If you're part of HERitage and you're giving to a collective cause, or if you give to your church, that is philanthropy. There has been a notion, I think, for so many years that philanthropy meant you had the capacity to give to $10 million, but that simply isn't true. If you give money to support causes that are impacting communities or making a difference for others, that is considered philanthropy. Another most common words that you hear that are related to describe philanthropy is fundraising. And I'm hoping that most of you on the call are in roles in your organizations where you act as a fundraiser or fund development officer. If so, this presentation hopefully will be very meaningful to you. So fundraising is an activity conducted with the intention of raising money for a nonprofit organization or a charity. It usually involves asking people for donations, whether the donations are cash or in kind, using a variety of communication methods, which we'll go over on some later slides. So fundraising 101, how to establish a fund development program. So I encounter a lot of people who have started nonprofits. They know they need to raise money, and their question is, like, how do I get started? So if you've ever been in that space, you're in that current space right now, I'm going to walk you through some of the things that I would recommend. So fund development is really how organizations use fundraising to build capacity and sustainability. So fund development is part of the strategic marketing of a nonprofit organization. And if you have a nonprofit that's small and you're the marketing person, the HR person, the executive director, and all that, what that means is this is for you. But the goal is to secure reliable sources of income that will sustain the organization through the realization of its long-term goals and missions. And some examples of that, which is, I feel like a gift that all of us probably have, is the ability to build relationships with people in other organizations that will support our nonprofit or our charity. And so that, to me, my success in this space has really been about the relationship piece. And that is the biggest piece of fundraising. A lot of people get really focused on the grant writing piece, but the relationship with a person who you've asked money from and who will give you funding is going to be key in sustaining whether or not you continue to receive grants or annual gifts and things of that nature. So always remember that the core basis of any fundraising effort that you or your organization embark upon, it really is about the relationship. The only time where the relationship doesn't come to play as much as it will in other situations, in my opinion, is in government grant writing, which I have an extensive background in doing. And with the government entities, it's more of just a black and white relationship, as far as they ask you what you need, you tell them what you need, but you don't have to send them thank you cards or invite them to special events and things like that. And so when I talk about relationship management and the importance of that, this is really more geared toward individuals, local foundations, private foundations, family foundations, corporate foundations, things of that nature. And then the development of an organizational strategic plan that coordinates various forms of fundraising, marketing, communication, volunteer engagement, and employee giving is key. Again, I think, which I'll talk more about later, that it's very important that you have different vehicles that you use to raise money and not just be solely dependent on writing grants. And so we'll talk more about some of those efforts and what you all can do in your organizations. So now that you know you need to have a fund development plan, the very next question is, well, what should I include? What does that mean? I'm new to this space. And so I talked briefly about the relationship building strategies, and I'll continue to echo that because it is very important. But really what that means is you sitting down with your staff or with your board and really thinking about, and if you have a marketing person or if you're the marketing person, thinking about donor-centered communications. And I am a person, when I'm thinking about how to engage others, I put myself in their shoes. So I think about, if I was on the receiving end of whatever I'm going to receive, what is it that I would want to know or hear or see about this organization, about their mission, about their target population, and what they want. And so I think that's very, very important. Also, if you are in an organization and you have identified prospective donors or people who already give to your organization or like-minded or like-cause organizations, it would always in good taste and a good idea to invite those donors or prospective donors to any events that you have. The more people can see the work that you're doing and be engaged in the work, the more comfortable and confident they tend to be with making a financial contribution as well as a time contribution. That's always the goal, is to have someone who's engaged with you financially and from a volunteer engagement perspective. The really, really important piece of any fund development plan is sitting down and thinking about saying thank you. What does that look like? Is it verbal? Yes, it can be. But what are the written communications that you can do to thank your donors? And so there are lots of different ideas that we could talk through where you can have like an annual thank you event where you invite everyone who gave the previous calendar year and just simply thank them for supporting your organization. And then you could have your staff or yourself or your board get up and talk about the successes you've had the previous year. And it's just another way to engage your donors and prospective donors, but also help them to feel appreciated and know that their gift, no matter how small it is or how large it was, truly is making the difference in the lives or the communities that you are serving. And then give appropriate recognition. Later on in the presentation, I'll go over some ideas about that because I think sometimes people struggle with, okay, if someone gives me $25, what do I give them? But if they give me $1,000, what should their thank you or donor appreciation look like? And so there are varying levels and some creative things that you can do to kind of separate the levels of giving and how you can make everyone feel appreciated. Listen, listen, listen is my motto. For me, I think through the years, I've seen lots of organizations meet with donors, whether they were individuals or corporations or foundations, and they spend the entire meeting talking about themselves, their nonprofit, and all of that. And I think it's so, so imperative to do that. But I think the most important piece is allowing the donor or the potential funder to talk, because when they're speaking, what you can be hearing or listening for are what their philanthropic goals are, what's important to them, who is important to them. And then your role as a fundraiser is to be thinking what programs or services you offer that match their philanthropic interests. So hearing them out, because if all you do is share about your organization's programs and needs, then you never really get to the point of knowing whether there's a match for what they're wanting to support and fund in partnership with what you're already doing or what you have the ability or capacity to create so that there is a match. And so I call that the marriage, listening so that you can marry what they want and what you want, and there's a win-win for everyone. And then providing individualized programmatic updates. And what I mean by that is, and I'll use this as an example. So if I have a donor at Metrocare who I know supports our veterans clinic, and I know that's their area of interest, when our clinic recently, because of COVID and the mental distress that veterans were already under even before COVID, the clinic started seeing active duty members, which they weren't established to initially do. They were only established to provide mental health services for veterans and their families. Well, that was an opportunity for Metrocare to connect with everyone who's ever given to our veterans program and say, you know, thank you so much for your support of the Cohen Military Family Clinic. Just wanted to update you with COVID and the increased demand for mental health services. The Cohen team effectively will now begin serving active duty military servicemen and women, you know, and so it's just a way to, and didn't do it in an email blast, but individually let people know, like, hey, I remembered that this is an important cause to you, and something is happening in an area of our organization that I want you to personally know, because this is where your heart is. This is where you like to give. And so I encourage you to think about instances where you can do that in one-offs and not the just general email blast, because the individualized programmatic updates makes donors or your supporters feel special and that they're always on your mind. The solicitation strategies, I'm sure most of you have heard about these, but identify, meaning identify donors or prospective donors who are interested in your cause. Research is researching who they give to, the type of gifts they give. Is it capital? Is it program? Is it operational? Size of gift. I mean, with Google and the internet at our fingertips, there's not much that we can't have access to or be privy to. But doing your research on any prospect or donor that you plan to engage is very important, because they'll be able to determine in a meeting with you whether or not you have done your research. So very, very important. And then planning is really key. And I'll be the first to admit that it's hard to plan when you're a smaller shop or you don't have a lot of human capital to execute this work. And it's always like a rat race in fundraising. I mean, a lot of moving parts, really moving fast. But I implore all of you to slow down and take the time to plan and be very thoughtful about your ask, how you're going to approach this person, who's the right person to make their approach. Is it you? Is it a board member? All of that needs to be thought out carefully. And really, it should always boil down to the person who has the best relationship with the person that you're wanting to engage. So it may not be you, even though you're the fundraiser and you may be responsible for getting the funds at the end, but that initial introduction or cultivation of the donor may need to start with someone else, with you in more of a supporting role. So what we call that in this space, if you're new to it, is we have like a primary and a secondary contact. And so that's also very helpful. And then the ask, of course, is important. And so your research is important there, because if you are asking someone for a $10,000 gift and they only typically give $1,500 gifts, they may think that you haven't done your research and that you're not familiar with their giving strategies. And so that's why the research is important. You can look at their 990s and it'll have a history of, you know, who they've granted money to. And so I'll go over some other websites that you can access later on in the presentation to help you with that. And then closing the gift. And stewardship, meaning after someone has made a gift or an award to your organization, properly thanking them. I think that's the biggest thing that I've heard from donors as feedback when they have given one-time gifts and they've never given to an organization again. It's because they weren't properly thanked, or they weren't thanked at all, or it took 4 months to thank them. And while we all get really busy and we may forget and we're just excited, there's a whole nother stewardship process that is key in keeping them as donors. And so you have to be very intentional about that and how you track that and be very mindful about that. I'm sorry, my thing is very sensitive. And then time frames, and I'll go over this later, but I would implore all of you to create a solicitation calendar organized by months of the fiscal year. We do something very similar to that, because there are so many grant-making organizations in our community, and it's really hard unless you have a sophisticated system that you can track and automate reports to tell you who's, giving money when. You have to do some type of manual tracking, and Excel will work. And I have an example of that later in the presentation. But that's key, because the one thing you don't want to do is miss opportunities to submit requests for your organization for programs that are really aligned well with what they're interested in, because it's in your head or on a notepad and not in one place. And whatever tracking system you use, that really should be your Bible at work, something that you're constantly retooling, reworking, adding to, taking off, like after conversations. Well, you know what, they're not a good fit after all, so we're going to move them, and who else can we add in their place? All of those things are very, very important. I added this slide because I've seen a lack of diversification in funding hurt a lot of small and large nonprofit organizations. And so even if you're a small shop, what I would recommend is that you think about all the different ways that you could secure funding. And even if they add up to small amounts, together, they still add up to whatever a fundraising goal for the year may be. And so I would offer you to consider a monthly giving strategy. So that could be an employee giving campaign, or you have an annual giving campaign from donors. And most people do that like around the holidays, like around Thanksgiving and Christmas, that end of year gift ask where everyone is asking for, a gift to their nonprofit. What I like to do is think outside the box and catch people when they're not being flooded with everyone else. And so if you have a nonprofit that has I'm using Metrocare again. So May is Mental Health Awareness Month. So we could do a monthly annual giving campaign every month and ask donors or people in the community to give to Metrocare as the largest provider of mental health services during the month of May, which is Mental Health Awareness Month. Or we could do it in April for Autism Awareness Month, because we have 2 autism centers for children in Dallas County. And so think about ways that you can secure additional funding from individuals and get that money on a monthly basis versus waiting to December when donors are just flooded with, end of year requests. Sponsorships, if you have events or if you do webinars or series, you can brand those, you can have sponsorships and, let people have logo placement, because most companies, most funders, they love that. They love to have their name on things. And so there are opportunities or things that you're doing at your company and you all are just doing them and paying for them. Consider adding a sponsorship opportunity to it where you come up with different levels. I mean, it could be anything from $100 sponsorship gets you these benefits up to, $1,000, or you'll see larger organizations that have them where the top sponsorship may be $50,000 or something, or more than that for a luncheon. And then the major gifts threshold is kind of a big one, but it depends on the size of your organization and it will vary. But I do think that having a major gift program is important. And for each organization, you have to decide based on your size, based on your budget, what is a major gift considered for your organization? Is it $1,000? If someone gives you $1,000, they're a major gift donor, then I would focus a fundraising strategy on donors and prospective donors who could give my organization $1,000. For Metrocare, we're a $120 million organization. So while $1,000 is great, it doesn't have the same impact as if we get $100,000. And so it'll vary from organization to organization, but that's something else that you can do. And you can do a major gift solicitation, and you can do that a different part of the year. You don't want to overtax your donors, your individuals, but certainly you can think about other ways or creative ways to secure major gift funding for your organizations to support programs or initiatives. And then grants, which I know is the big theme. You can have a diversification of grants. So you need to be looking at private grants. You need to be exploring corporate grant making opportunities that fit with your organization's mission and cause, and then the government grants, whether it's state or federal. And I know a lot of people have a lot of fear about that, and they can be a doozy at times, but I really feel like, and this is my personal opinion, it's more paper production. But when you write to them, you don't have to be creative and pull on the heartstrings, of funders like you do with the private foundations. But I would just implore you not to just stick with private or family foundations, and really look at other grants that are out there from other industries. And then, of course, events. We have an annual Meal for the Minds luncheon. And then we also, around the holidays, we do different holiday giving programs, as many of you do. And we, in the past, have done Coats for a Cause, which are coats for kids who don't have warm clothing during the winter. We've done blankets for the homeless, for our homeless population. And so those are still gifts. They're in kind, but there's still opportunities for you to engage with donors who support your organization and believe in what you do. So if you don't have any type of event, you should consider doing that. And it doesn't have to be around the holiday. It can be around, if you serve children, if there's some event or some icon month that mirrors the work that you do, like, I don't know, Juvenile Diabetes Month or something like that. You could have something around that as well. Number 6. These are all the reasons why I say you need to, or I believe you need to have a diversified funding, because it really does create a healthy stream of funding for your nonprofit, which is key. And I say that because if you are a nonprofit, and I'm picking on United Way, they're a former employer of mine, and so I have a lot of respect for them and love them. But a lot of organizations back in the early 2000s, United Way was the primary funder for a lot of nonprofits. And when they changed their funding strategy, that hurt a lot of nonprofits because they didn't have a diversification of funding streams, because funders can change their priorities at any given time. And if you don't have other funds that you can rely on, or that you are able to receive, it can really put your nonprofit and the operations of your nonprofit and programs at harm. So I'll talk a little about that on this next block, which is events out of your control. And I think COVID is a really good example. There are so many funders out there now who were interested in animals, just beautification projects, parks, whatever you want to call it. But they really came together as a community of philanthropists when COVID hit, and pulled their money together and start redirecting the money that they had for other initiatives that maybe mirrored or matched what we do as nonprofits, to address nonprofits who were struggling or being severely impacted by COVID. And so we have, of course, no knowledge ahead of time when things like this are going to happen. And so at any given moment, there could be a community event or a worldwide event that will force a funder and their board of trustees to divert their typical areas of interest to help meet the immediate needs of the community. And if you're solely relying on one funder for a source of funds, and their new strategy doesn't align with what they've typically funded you for, you could be in real trouble. Rule of thumb always is no one grant, event, or donor should make up more than 25% of your total income for your organization. And just for anyone who's asking, I'm going to share some of the slides, and I'll send that to Dr. Booker, and we can get that out to the attendees. So you can take notes or take pictures of the screen if you want to, but I'll make sure that you get the important information. And then also, diversified funding streams also help increase your organization's sustainability and funding strength. And when you talk to donors, I know you all see this on grant applications if you are writing them. Donors always want to know, who else have you asked to support this program? And all of us have been in a space where we needed to be honest, and we were, and the truth was they were the only ones we had asked at that time. And so that's never a good thing. So as you're building your funding plans, or as you're looking at prospects to fund your agency or programs, think about who else you can ask, so that when donors ask this question on the grant applications, that you can list more than just them, because no funder wants to be the sole supporter of a program. Grant writing strategies. So I know initially that this was the main topic of tonight's event, but I, again, wanted to at least walk you all through the fund development piece, because as I said early on in the call, raising or securing funds for a nonprofit is more than just grant writing. It's all the other things that generate revenue to support what you're doing. So essentials for increasing funding through grant writing have to be really, really clearly definable and relevant mission. And so if you have a mission that doesn't really define who you are, what you do, what you stand for, I think that, that's an exercise, maybe at a board retreat or with your board of directors, that you could really spend some time, because mission is going to be important to donors as you approach them, because they're going to want to make sure that what you're striving to achieve aligns with what they want to achieve with their philanthropic gifts to the community. And then having sustainable financial and operational structure is important. And I know sometimes for smaller organizations that can be a challenge, but as long as you have really good bookkeeping and financials, even if it's on a spreadsheet, Excel spreadsheet, I think funders understand that, if, like I said, if you're a smaller agency, but just make sure that all of that is in place and in line. And then using fundraising tools and methods to secure funding, like a website donation page. If you have a website, make sure that you have a donation page or a link that can drive people to give online. I mean, we're such a technical advanced society right now, so that's very important. And if you don't have the capacity to have that, at least have an email or a contact number that lets people know if they're interested in giving, this is how they do that. Because if they have to search for it and it's buried somewhere, a lot of times they'll just say forget it and go on to something else. And so you want to make that really easy and visible to them as best possible. Also, if you do printed material, I encourage you to have that information. Like if you would like to learn more or make a donation to X nonprofit, and then give them, either visit the website, the donate page, call this person, make that visible on anything that's going to be external facing that might get into the hands of any of us, because remember, everyone is a philanthropist. Research tools. There are so many opportunities for you to find information about donors. Foundation Directory Online is one. I know that they have paid subscriptions, and they're, of course, the better version of being able to access information. So you can check into that. And then grants.gov is free. So as you're looking for government grant opportunities, so that's state or federal, grants.gov is a good thing. And I always encourage people to get on those listservs, so that you don't always have to be searching for grants from those opportunities. if you're on their listservs, anytime an opportunity to submit a grant comes up, they're going to email you. And I mean, it does kind of flood your mailbox, but at least you have it. You can scan through it and say, oh, this is an opportunity we may want to, excuse me, explore further. And you have that information. The local library, and I don't know, I think the Dallas Public Library is opening back up, but if you didn't know, they have an entire floor, and I don't know if they've changed it because of COVID and them being closed or if it was damaged in the storm, but they have an entire floor dedicated to grants and grants research, and they have computers there available where you can search for funding, all types of funding. So if you've never been there, that's an opportunity for you. And then if you do searches on corporate foundations, if you know of corporations that support your work, you can just go to their website and it'll be under community philanthropy, how we support communities. It'll have some language like that that will lead you to know that this is where they're grant making and how they support programs and initiatives in the communities where they have operations can be realized. And then also, as you're writing grants, some of the strategies you need to be mindful of is useful projects and initiatives, things that you know people are interested in. And again, there are trends that happen in our society or our local community that make donors shift. I talked about COVID. There was a shift back in like 2008 when the stock market crashed. And so people start shifting their funding for that because foundations were losing money. And so they were giving less, giving to different things, things of that nature. So keep that in mind. I think something that all nonprofits or agencies struggle with, and this conversation won't, give you any real help with it, but you could research it, is the use of a logic model. When I was at United Way, they went to logic model process for grantees, and it really forces you to look at how your projects inputs, which are program investments, and outputs and outcomes are related, because it's so competitive now. And so funders are being more intentional about how they give and not giving just because it's the right thing to do. They want to give to see impact. And so with that being the case, you have to really fine tune how their gift is going to make an impact. So you see North Texas Food Bank, City Square, maybe American Red Cross, places like that, which we do it too, and you can too, thinking about what does a gift of $100 do for the people that you serve or the community? Does it, make sure that 10 students are able to read? I'm making this up, but you get my drift. So, and younger generation givers, are really interested in that too. So they're more interested in the impactful giving and not so much giving just because I have the capacity to, but how is my $100 going to make a gift? And if you've been in this business for a long time, you have to sit back and think about that. And a lot of times we don't know, how is $1,000? What is that going to do? I mean, it takes some thoughtful processing with, your teams or your board. So think about that as a strategy and as a opportunity for you to be able to clearly state how gifts impact those you serve. And then also talk about your project's uniqueness. One of the things that you'll notice on grant applications too, funders want to know who else is doing this same work. If you don't know who else is doing the same work that you do, then that can potentially harm you in the application process, because what it tells a funder is you have not explored and done research because you're just focused mainly on your vision, your mission, and your nonprofit. But understanding who else is doing this work or a piece of the work in the same space that you're in is really, really important. And it also will help you realize opportunities for partnerships, because one organization may be doing this, one organization may be doing that, but both know that the gap is this, and maybe together, how can we do that? Because I think what funders are getting fatigued about is the duplication of services. And so really make sure that you not only research your funders, but also know who your competition is and be able to clearly state that in your proposal if it's asked of you, because you can almost guarantee that those nonprofits are going to the same funder. And so they're aware, and it doesn't bode well if you're not aware of who else is doing it in the space. Also, following the grantor's guidelines and requests for proposal to the letter. That means if they say, organize your proposal this way, use 12-point font in Arial, you are not to use 11-point font in Times New Roman because that's what you like, how it looks on paper. Because remember, it's competitive and funders have to look for ways, if they don't have enough money to give to everybody, they start having to weed people out. And sometimes the weeding out is because you didn't follow directions. I'm saying we because I do fundraising too. We didn't follow the directions, and funders start to question, well, if they can't follow simple directions here, can I trust them with $50,000? And so in my office, we read the guidelines multiple times, highlight, sticker, before we submit. Do we do this? Do we have that? I mean, it's like a whole process. And I know it may be difficult if you're a one-person shop, but I feel like with a fresh, clean pair of eyes, get the guidelines, and I just check off, have I done this? Have I done this? I write complete or whatever I need to do. But that's really, really important. The do's and don'ts, as I mentioned before, do your research, allow adequate time to write your compelling proposal. And I know that some of us on the call may be laughing because we always anticipate giving ourselves a lot of leeway so that we have enough time. But we also know that sometimes grant writing is last minute and it's a grind. And we've all stayed up to 12, 1, 2, or 3 writing something that was due the next day at 5. And so I've been there. I understand, but you should always attempt to write your proposal so that it can be compelling, because sometimes when you rush, we make mistakes. I've already said the next one about following their guidelines and tailoring your proposal to the specific funder. We all do a lot of, cutting and pasting. But when you're rushing, sometimes you cut and paste and you have other nonprofits' names in your proposal, because we're using their name, trying to personalize it. And so I encourage you to make sure that you're reading that to make sure you don't have those type of errors, because again, they're having to weed out who they want to give their money to, and errors can really be costly when funders are reviewing proposals. Also, be honest, specific, concise, and use examples to substantiate what you are trying to convey in your proposal. We have a rule, multiple eyes on a proposal. I can work on a proposal for weeks, which means that it's very hard for me to proof it because I've looked at it so much, it all looks right to me. And so what we kind of do is have someone in the office that hasn't looked at it at all, because when you haven't looked at something at all, you can easily pick up on mistakes as soon as you pick it up and start reading. And so we have a process in place to do that. And if you have staff, I implore you to do that. If you have board members who can read, that will be my recommendation. And use your active voice. And I put an example of that. A lot of us say things like over 200 adults have been enrolled in the program this past year. That's very passive, versus the program enrolled over 200 adults in the past year. So it's more active and not passive. And so those are just some small tips. The other thing that I would encourage you to do is use comparison data. And what I mean by that is when we talk about, because all grants have a problem or a need statement. And so when we talk about the need in our community, also do a little bit more research and find some countywide or statewide data, because that really kind of shows where we are locally. And then you can talk about how you're going to address the local problem that is a nationwide or a countywide problem in other communities. I always recommend writing the abstract or the executive summary last, because without having the specific details throughout the proposal, it's hard to summarize it. And I feel like when we try to do the executive summary first, we sit at our computer and we think we have writer's block, and we do sometimes, and we're just stuck because we're trying to summarize something that we haven't put the nitty gritty to. And so I always encourage you to do that first. Also have boilerplate sections for information commonly requested by funders, your mission, your vision, your geography, your service area, population served, really good, concise description of your programs and services, personnel qualifications. They want job descriptions, they want bios. And so we have a boilerplate folder. And anytime we get a bio for a staff person, it goes in there. Anytime we annually we look at our numbers for our programs, we just put it in there, because that keeps you or prevents you from having to go to the program staff and say, okay, how many people did y'all serve in this program last year? We just make that an annual requirement that they supply us that. So we already have that information on deck, and it'll save you time. And we do the same thing in a boilerplate file for standard documentations, which are your IRS letter, audited financials, your organizational budget, board of directors, and things of that nature. And with all the racial equity things that are happening, a lot of funders or applications are asking for your racial demographics of your board and your staff. And so if you've not been used to supplying that information, I would say you could create documents that have that. So like on our board list, I'll have our board member, his chairman, Terry James, chairman of the board, African-American male, and then I may have that he's an attorney or a community volunteer. And so creating documents that already have that, so then you're not having to do that during the time that you're trying to put your proposal together, is really key and is helpful. The don'ts, we've kind of talked over this. Don't begin writing until you understand the funder's guidelines. Number 2 is a big one. Do not assume that the reader will understand or be familiar with your targeted population, organization, and program. I think we are so close to the work that we do, we automatically assume that other people know what we do and who we are, and that's simply not the case. And when I started this webinar in the beginning, I told you I always try to put myself in the framework or in the mind of the reader. And so I try to anticipate, if I was reading this, what would I want to know? What would I need to know? So think about that when you're writing. Do not rely solely on spell check to proof your proposals. I read things backwards, and I was sharing that with my staff earlier, about a week or 2 ago. When I say backwards, I don't read backwards, but we were taught to read left to right. And so when you are reading proposals, sometimes because we're rushing, we don't really read, we're scanning, and you miss things when you scan. So you really have to take time to look at each word independently. And so I do that backwards, and I make sure there's a E, a H, and a T, that's right. Because if I just read, then I start rushing and then I miss things. And so that's just a strategy that I use. It may not work for everyone, but that's just a strategy that I've like, and that has worked for me. And then don't exceed the number of pages allowed or include additional attachments the funder did not request. They throw those things away. And again, it makes them feel like you don't pay attention or follow directions. And so be very, very mindful of that. And I know it's because, I want them to know this and I didn't get to share this in a proposal. But again, it's very, very important that you don't do that. Okay, hold on. Okay. I talked earlier, or if I didn't, I think it's important, if you don't have software that can do this, that you have an annual grants submission tracking form. I think I did mention it earlier, where it says like the grantor in this month these foundations or corporations or government entities have funding applications available. You can put, are they a previous grantee of yours? Have you received money from them before? Yes or no? What program you've identified that you want them to fund that aligns with what they have available. You need to decide how much you're going to ask, when the submission date is, where you submitted to, and then status. And then, of course, there are other columns you can put, like, is it pending? Is it awarded? How much? We have notes, like, you know, different things that we want to just keep track of, but really having something visible that really is your Bible. Like in October, I know if this is due October 25th, then I really need to start gathering my stuff, you know, 2 to 3 weeks before that. So then you have to, you know, be in the first part of October to do that. So just being mindful and seeing it on paper, looking at it weekly, daily, keeps it at the forefront of your mind, because sometimes things happen and move fast. And then it's October 23rd, and you know there's no way we can submit that, and then you've missed the opportunity to get funding. I talked a little bit about special events earlier as a diversification of funding, but there are lots of events that you can do. Dallas is event heavy, and I guess we like being social. I certainly do. And so lunches, dinner parties, 5K runs, golf tournaments, silent auctions, raffles, cook-offs, conferences, all of those things can have fundraising revenue attached to it by doing sponsorships, you know, raffles, giveaways, you know, all those type of things. So now that we are slowly coming out of COVID and our shelter in place things because of COVID, I think that we have an opportunity to create some new fun ideas. And so you should do that. And then cause related fundraising ideas. And what I mean by that, so if your organization doesn't participate in North Texas Giving Day, you can look into that, Giving Tuesday. And then I just listed a lot of the icon awareness days that align with my organization. And so we look for different things to do during those months, depending on how heavy the other work responsibilities are. As an example, for Autism Awareness Month, we did a partnership with Raising Cane's for our 2 autism centers. And we just created a day where between 12 and 7, anyone who went in and Metrocare between 12 p.m. and 7 p.m., we received 15% of all of those sales total. And it wasn't a lot of money at all, but it was some money, and it was an event, and it exposed our agency, what we did, and things like that. So you can be creative with that. And then direct mail solicitation. And those are just like end of year letters where you're telling people about what you do, who you are, and asking them to support your cause. And then I won't go over this. I'll send this because I know we're getting close to time, but the donor cultivation and stewardship best practices are really key. And that really is just focused on creating relationships with your donors, thanking them timely and properly, how you're going to cultivate them. Is it, you know, taking them to lunch or brunch? Is it a letter first? Is it a phone call first? Is it a site visit? Things of that nature. And imploring other people in your organizations who may know them to assist with those cultivations as well. And I will send this slide for sure because it has a lot of context on it, but I want you to have it. And I'll send this too. So this is a sample cultivation plan. And so as you identify, and Betty Jo Smith is the person. And so these are the ways that this nonprofit engaged her. They called her, they wanted to do her a tour, they asked her for lunch, you know, they followed up to see if she had any conversations, you know, what her favorite programs are, things like that by donor. Is really important. And you can do them in groups if you're doing it for a specific program or initiative, but you can also do it individually if it's just a new person that you're trying to engage with your organization. And then the last slide is the sample stewardship plan that I talked about earlier. And this takes some thought, but sometimes we have people that give small amounts, and then we have sometimes people that give large amounts. And so a sample stewardship plan could be like everyone who gives $99 and below, they get a thank you email within 48 hours. Thank you so much for your gift to Metrocare Services. We're so appreciative of your support. And, because of you, 50,000 people in Dallas County have access to mental health services, annually or something. And then you can see the different tiers. As people give more, they give certain things. They get certain things. They get a personal note card from the board member, or an invitation to a certain event, or a newsletter, or different things. I mean, it could be the larger that the gifts give. Like if someone sends us a check that's a very large amount, we're going to pick up the phone and call them and thank them. And then we're going to do all the other things that we're supposed to do, like the thank you letter and all of that. So just some ideas, but I'll send this too. And there's some good examples on the website if you want to dig deeper into that, because that really is key. I know that was a lot of information, but I hope that you all have enjoyed this. I'm happy to stay on if I need to answer any questions. And then as I committed, I will get some of the key slides over to HERitage and have them send those out to people. And with that, I would like to conclude my presentation, and I really appreciate and thank each of you for joining.